Hi, this is Matt Hugg with Nonprofit.Courses, and I have with me today a special guest, Priscilla Rosenwald, Principal of Leadership Recruiters. And I say that she's special because I've been working with Priscilla for a while, and I've always enjoyed it, and I am honored to have her here on a webinar just for you.
Thanks, Matt. It's a pleasure.
Well, tell me about Leadership Recruiters.
So I started my firm about 20 years ago to focus on leadership issues in the nonprofit sector. And our focus has really been with organizations where there's been long-term leadership and how they prepare for a transition and how they hire successors.
All right. And today we're going to talk specifically about fundraising during a leadership transition, which you and I know is a real issue.
It's actually often completely overlooked when a leader is preparing to leave. What often happens when an organization has had a leader for a long period of time, and I'm going to say anything from 10 years onward, that person is often the face of the organization, and all the outside stakeholders identify with that person, the executive director, the CEO, and they are often the main fundraiser. It puts fear in the hearts of all their donors and their board when that leader indicates that they might be retiring, that they're ready for a different role, and the fundraising staff all gasp.
Yes, because they've had this strong influence in their lives for so long, and it's just really hard to move forward. So without preempting any of the stuff we're going to talk about here, let's get started.
Great. A fundraising pipeline. Every organization has a fundraising pipeline. What we're talking about is the diversity of the pipeline, how active it is, and how many people in the organization are involved in the pipeline. Is it just the chief executive? Is it the board leadership? Is there an internal staff that also has interface with your donors, whether they're individual donors, government donors, foundation donors, corporate donors? The diversity of your pipeline is going to help you maintain sustainability.
And a healthy nonprofit needs to have a pipeline anyhow. This isn't being invented so if you don't have this pipeline in place,
it's a hard time to start it.
Right, you're going to see it when there's a leadership transition, for sure.
Especially if this pipeline has really been dependent on individuals. If your major donors, who are wealthy individuals, have been your main pipeline, likely their main relationship has been with the chief executive. And now the chief executive might be departing the organization.
Yeah, and that's going to be a major issue.
And of course, every organization can go through a leadership change and use this as an opportunity to grow, to become more vibrant, and to become stronger organizationally and financially. So this is a perfect time, if you haven't done it up until now, to really engage your board leadership and your internal staff, working closely with the chief executive to really grow your fundraising pipeline. I know it may sound funny to do it now that the chief executive is about to depart, but it's really a good time to really create a new plan.
So what do they say? Every crisis is an opportunity, right?
It's a perfect opportunity.
And here you go. Right. Okay.
So I just want to go through these points because I think they're so important. It's a unique chance for the organization to manage change. And change, as Matt said, can be scary, or it's a really wonderful opportunity for new approaches for innovation. If the leadership practices haven't been in place, this is a good time to start to set them up. So it's also laying the groundwork for the leadership successor. And also a great time to really reach out to all your internal stakeholders, organization-wide, and all your external stakeholders. And we're going to give you some tips for how to do that. What I often find when I go into organizations who are preparing for leadership change is they're afraid to talk to their stakeholders because they think they'll upset them if they know that a leadership change is imminent. And that's actually the last thing you want to do is overlook them and surprise them. No one likes surprises, least of all your donors.
Well, that's an excellent point because, the whole idea is a major donor wants to be an insider.
Correct.
And so if you exclude them from
Right.
that, now you're really making things worse, especially in such a time when you're having a leadership change.
Right. And these donors have been so attached to this executive. They've been good friends. The chief executive has done a beautiful job of cultivating them. And now that relationship is going to change.
Yeah, and they have the best interests of the organization in mind. Otherwise, they wouldn't be major donors.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's more than just the interest in the chief executive, it's the interest in the organization. So we're really talking about how to engage them and how to begin communicating with them in a way that brings them in and makes them part of the process. So let's talk about some ways to do that. They will see it as a loss. It's inevitable they'll see it as a loss because they've been attached to a relationship. And some people have been attached broader to the organization. Some people may be engaged in other projects, maybe doing volunteer work with the organization, but we see most often that they're very attached to one person who's the leader. Again, their loyalties were generated by this leader. They've cultivated them, they've grown the relationships. So we want to expand the relationships at this time. I was thinking of an example where we did a search for an organization that had a leader that had been in his role for at least 10 years. And what they did was not put the donors on the search committee, but created an opportunity for some of the main donors to meet the candidate that they were going to hire before they hired the candidate. So they just felt like they had some sense of buy-in. And I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but I thought that was an interesting way to engage them. They weren't part of the search committee. They weren't making the decision, but they got to meet the new leader and got to feel that they had a beginning relationship with the new leader.
Do you want the former CEO to be part of that introduction process?
Come back to that because that's a really nice question.
Okay, that's fine. Right.
And a good question. We want to really get designated staff and designated board members to start to meet all the donors. And when I say all the donors, I mean the individual donors, the foundation leadership, even making sure that you meet and connect with government leaders on grants, the key contacts there, and certainly your corporate sponsors. So they start to see more people than just the CEO. So my rule of thumb is once the CEO announces they're departing, they never, ever, ever meet with any funder or stakeholder by themselves.
Oh, interesting.
That there's always a staff person or a board member with them to ensure continuity.
Right. And this is, of course, in the hopeful circumstance that everything was good when they announced their departure.
Yeah. Yes, we're doing best case scenario first. So yes, this is a leader that's been loved. They're leaving the organization in good hands and they want to continue all the goodwill that they've engendered.
Right.
So starting at that moment, and I know this is hard for a lot of organizations.
And for a lot of leaders.
Yeah. Once they announce their departure, I would say that they never go to any meetings.
Right.
Whether it's one-on-one meetings, whether it's a meeting that your funder's having, a meeting that your industry leaders are having, they need to see more people in the organization.
Well, and that's tough because these leaders, I'm sure, have found these donors to be friends.
That's right.
And so now you're saying you cut yourself off from all these friends.
Well, you're going to bring somebody else in on the date.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
That's what you're going to do.
Okay.
It's just not going to be a date that's the two of them.
Right.
Depending on, really. And I would be very thoughtful about who these donors and stakeholders are and who the best people are to accompany the CEO. You may want the board chair. You may want the board vice chair. You may want the director of development that doesn't often get to go out very much.
Sure.
You may want the head of a program service to have an interface with these people. What you want is that your donors have a sense of security, that the organization is going to continue, is robust. They're going to miss this one relationship, but there is enough in the organization that they can continue to keep their heart there.
That makes a lot of sense.
Does that make sense?
Totally, yeah.
The hardest part is making sure that the board is in lockstep with this because the board really has to be directing the CEO to slow down, come back in, and make sure that it's not easy to do, but wherever they're going, somebody's going with them.
Well, and for a long tenured board, they've probably come to depend upon or long tenured CEO and board, they've come to depend upon the leader to make these decisions.
Absolutely, with complete autonomy.
Exactly. So now to re-engage the board at that level could be a real challenge.
It is a challenge. So this really requires some significant board education because it's bringing them back into the process.
Right.
It's engaging them more than they've had to be, my guess is, because they've had a leader that they trust, that they're comfortable with, and they've given tremendous autonomy to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's not a lack of trust with this leader as much as helping expand how they guide the direction of the organization.
Right.
You can't just have the leader leave and then assume that a new leader is going to come in and pick up the pieces very easily, because it won't happen easily.
Yep.
And you will lose some funders in the process.
Yeah, well, I think that's inevitable either way, and might be an opportunity for some people to bow out, even on the board, and that's okay. To have.
That's the part of change that's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially when the board's been there maybe as long as the leader.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry, this may not be your organization, but it's amazing how many organizations I work with where the board's doing great. So every so often they may bring somebody new on the board, but the key leaders on the board have sometimes been there as long as the CEO or executive director.
Yeah.
I just worked with an organization where that happened.
Mm.
She'd been there 30 years, and it's amazing how many people on the board had also been there 30 years.
Wow. Yeah.
So it was very hard for them to want to step up and redirect her energies.
Yeah.
She wasn't happy about it, and the board didn't want to overstep the boundaries. The important piece that I want to say is that it's always about the organization, never about the person, whether the person is the board chair, whether the person is the CEO or executive director. It's always, always the best interest of the organization. If you keep that front and center, it'll help with a lot of the decisions and the plans that are made.
Yeah.
Again, this is what happens with loss. So when a leader leaves, we're talking about loss. So people have disappointment, uncertainty, and Matt's saying that possibly people might disengage. You don't want them to, so you will do your best to not lose them, but it's loss. People react differently to loss. The transition plan. So we have gone ahead of ourselves, but let's talk a little bit about that transition plan. A transition plan is different than a succession plan. So I think they get confused all the time.
Yeah.
So organizations create succession plans, and that's really about the staff roles and how staff move into leadership roles. I'm really referring to a transition plan, which is much bigger, which is how things in the organization will be handled leading up to the time that the chief executive leaves, and probably for the first couple months afterward.
Okay.
And part of that transition plan is how the board is stepping up and how all the donors and stakeholders are going to be engaged going forward.
Okay, that's interesting.
Have you seen that?
Not nearly as much as I should.
So we've tried to bring that into organizations we've worked with,
right,
and made that very clear how important that is.
Well, I think, and it's really important to make that distinction, like you said, between transition and succession, because it's not easily discernible for people. Yeah.
I prefer to think of it as leadership continuity for the organization,
right?
Not just for the individual. I have never seen a strong organization that didn't have a strong engaged board, and there's no more important time for the board to step up than during this transition.
Yeah.
And will you lose some board people during this time? It's a possibility that not everybody will be happy to step up the way they're needed.
Well, and again, that's okay, because there's a lot of times when the board needs to change and shift. And, in 5 years, it's entirely possible that all those people will be different anyhow.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah, well, because the new leader brings in new people that they want on the board to work with them.